Everyone, it's Lori and welcome to the channel. In today's episode, I'm going to give you my 3 must-have edits for any flower image. So let's jump in and get started. So the first must-do with any flower image is to remove any distractions or clean up your flower. So in this example, the flower was really pretty clean. I don't see a whole lot of blemishes, but we have some distracting elements. So the first thing I'm going to do, I am here in Photoshop. Now I chose Photoshop because the new remove tool is fantastic. If you only use Photoshop for this tool, I highly recommend it. It will save you so much time. So I'm going to open up the remove tool and I'm just going to come over. Now I have my tool set at the top of my screen here so that it does not remove as I brush. I like to make my brushes, brush on where I want it, and then click it. I also find that it works better on my computer. So if you're having issues with this tool, I highly recommend you try selecting that. It's up here at the top menu. Okay, so also with this tool, sometimes you have to go over it multiple times. It's not perfect, but it did a very nice job. Now, I still have a little bit of blemish here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer again. I want to do select subject, and Photoshop did a great job of selecting the subject. Now what I'm going to do is go up to select and click inverse. Now my flower is protected, but I have my background available. This is going to allow me to get in really close here and remove a little bit more of these distractions. So that's a trick that I like to do. Okay, let's see if we can get those removed. And we're just cleaning this up. This was a full frame, center shot looking down at the flower. So we can see it did okay here. I'm going to come in, just do a little bit more right here. And there's also another trick that I can show you to clean this up. But let's try the remove tool one more time. Again, sometimes I go over it a couple times. All right, let's do this one, and then I'll show you my second tool, which would be to use the clone tool. So after I've done the remove a couple times, I'm going to come over to the clone tool, and let's make the brush a little bit smaller, and I'm going to select near the area that I want to clone, and then I'm just going to come around, and you can see what a great job, of course, the clone tool does. And so I'm just going to continue to clean that up, and I also can come right over here and get right to that edge and clean that. And then I'm going to just come around and continue to look for any other distractions. You could also just come in and get that a little bit tighter. So I would just keep working on this depending on how smooth you want everything to be in your background. You could just continue to use the clone tool and get rid of any areas that you think are a little bit distracting. And sometimes I like to balance the look of the background. So this is where I could grab my brush and come in, and let's go ahead with the eyedropper tool. I'm going to select this green color, grab my brush, and I'm just going to pop in. Let's make the opacity about 30 to 50%. I'm just going to pop in some of that green, especially down here. So I'm just balancing the light in my image. So anywhere where it's got that dark color. And because my flower is protected, I can get in really close with it. Now I can also go back to the eyedropper, select this kind of light color, this neutral color, pop some of that in, grab my eyedropper again, select this light gray, and just add some of that, just kind of balancing and creating my own texture around my background. So it's just going to give it a little cohesiveness. And again, I want to add some more of that kind of brighter green. So I'm just using the eyedropper, going back and forth. You can multiply your brush. You don't have to change your opacity. Just brush it or pop it on more than once. And you can come in a little closer to your flower, just getting rid of these darker areas. Just kind of bringing some emphasis here to it. So I can continue to add. I could also go ahead and add a little bit of white, but I want to take my opacity really low. And yeah, I can just pop in some brightness. So I liked that bokeh. I don't want it gone, but I just want to keep it, just wanted to even that background out. So now if we look at this before, you can see the background, and now after, it's just smoothing it out a little. And it's a preference. You don't have to do as much as I've done. You could also reduce the opacity. So that's if we just take it down a little bit, or you could keep it all the way up. All right, so dealing with a distracting background and cleaning up around your image is the first step. This would be another image where this one would be really quick. So I can go to that awesome new remove tool. I am just going to remove this distracting element. And I'm going to remove this as well. And maybe this little branch. Let's just see what it does. I could crop this image as well, but I'm just going to use the remove tool first and clean this area up. All right, it did a pretty good job. What I would do is continue to use the remove tool to come around, and then I would probably use the same technique that I showed you in the last flower. I would use the clone tool, could also add some texture to this image. So I wanted to add a texture, I could. You could continue to work on it. So tip number one is work on your background and remove any distracting elements. Now, number two is to always pop the brightness or the color in the center of your flower. Now, there are two ways that I like to do that. So let's go ahead and duplicate this background layer. The first thing I like to do is you can use the Adobe Camera Raw filters, or if you only edit in Lightroom, it is the same thing. So Adobe Camera Raw is just a mirror image of the tools in Lightroom. So what I would do is grab the mask tool, and once we get that to pop open, I'm going to use the brush. You could use objects, you could use whichever tool you like. I like to use the brush. I'm going to keep my feather probably only about 50%. I don't need a whole lot of feather here. Flow and density are fine. And what I'm going to do is just brush on. And there we go. Brush on the center. Now, what I want to also do is I'm now going to take my feather up, and I want to feather this out on these petals because I want it to look natural. So I'm just going to kind of feather it out, come down here. Now, there's two things that I like to do. One is I like to open up the shadows. The center of flowers usually have some darkness. So let's open up the shadows, then we can come in and give it a pop of exposure. You could also pop your whites. Now, this image is super soft, but I did want to just open up the shadows and give it that little pop of exposure, which takes your eye to that gorgeous center. Now, while we're here, we could do another mask if we wanted. So let's create another mask. I'm going to grab the brush again, and anywhere where I think the flower is not, I've got brightness over here on the right, but not here on the left, I'm just going to come in and paint on these petals. I call this light painting, and I'm just going to add a little bit of brightness, tiny, tiny bit of exposure. Very, very little, just to even that out. And you can just kind of move around with your brush anywhere where you want to add that. All right, once you're finished, you click OK. It will take your image back into Photoshop. So let's look at before, look at that dark center, and look at after. It's just bringing out that gorgeous color that's in there and the gorgeous detail. Now, if you don't want to do that method, there is another method that I like. Let's go over back to our first image and look at this one. So another tool that I like to use is a layer, transparent layer that is 50% gray layer. So let me walk you through it and then I'll explain it. First thing is you can hold your Option key and create a new layer. Now, when you do that, it is going to give you a pop-up box. Usually that works. Let's see if we can get this to, there it goes. So what we're going to do now is select mode, and you want to do overlay. Then you're going to see this option, fill with neutral color gray, 50% gray. What this is doing, it's giving us a 50% gray layer. And now we want to come over to our paint. We want our foreground color to be white. We're going to grab just a soft brush, and I recommend you start at about 20% opacity. Now this is just like dodging, but the 50% gray layer makes it softer, gentler, non-destructive, and it's just going to give us this pop of brightness right here in the center of our image. Now this is not opening up our shadows, so if you have a really dark center, you may still need to go to Adobe Camera Raw or back into Lightroom to open up those shadows. But if you just want to add that little bit of pop, that is a great tool to do it. So you can see the difference there. All right, so number 2 is always pop, open up the shadows, give a little pop of exposure to the center of your flower. It makes a huge impact. All right, step number 3 is to always think about the light. So now let's go back to Lightroom. And I have this flower. This was an image that I actually just discovered I had never edited. And I didn't edit it because I actually had exposed for the background and not the subject. So you can see the background is what is glowing versus my beautiful flower. So the first step, of course, in our process is to always think about our background. So what I want to do here is create a background mask to address this bright background. So let's go ahead and select our mask here in Lightroom, background, and let me change my overlay color so that we can really see today what we're working with. All right, so Lightroom did a pretty good job of selecting that background for us. It left out most of the flower. And so the first thing I want to do is go ahead and bring down the highlights. It was just too bright. Now I can also come down and I want to soften this background. So I'm going to reduce the clarity. I could also add a little bit of dehaze if I want to give it a little bit dreamier look. And then I'm going to see what it does to pull back the exposure. Now remember, we are only working with our background, so don't be alarmed. Your flower may look a little darker, but we haven't really changed it yet. All right, so I think that's a good place to start with this background. So the next thing I want to do is pop this flower, open up the center, the brightness. So our step 2, we're going to add a new mask, select subject. Lightroom did a great job of our mask. And now the first thing I want to do is come down and open up the shadows. Just going to open those up. I'm also going to look at my histogram. Look at all this space here in the whites. So I am going to move the whites over, which is going to brighten up my image automatically. Look at that. Now my subject is exposed. Now, if I had opened up the whites at the point of import, so if I had come down here and opened up the whites, it would have overexposed my image. So let me add a snapshot here. And I'm going to go back to import and show you. So if you look at your histogram and you can see your whites are underexposed. But if I brighten that, look what it's doing to my background. So this is where it is so important and handy to use the mask tools here in Lightroom. So what we've done is with our, we did our mask on our subject, which then allowed us to brighten it up. Now, what I want to do is work on the center of this flower just a little bit more, because our third step is to consider the light. So the light in this image is coming from this direction and really shining on the center of our flower. So we want to enhance that. There's a couple ways we can do that. So first, I'm going to grab my mask again, create new mask, and I want to use the brush. So as we did in our Photoshop images, I'm going to come in first and open up and pop the center of the flower. There's a little bit of glow right there on that petal and over here. Now I'm going to come in and first, little bit of exposure. And I want to add a little bit of golden light here because there is yellow in this flower. So I'm going to use the temperature slider. I'm also going to open up the shadows. And because I know the whites were a little bit underexposed, let's open up the whites just a little bit too. We could also do a little tone curve. I'm not seeing a big difference there, so I think maybe just a little bit. And I think overall, that is pretty nice. Let's take the amount slider on our mask. If I take it all the way up, that's probably too much. So I'm just going to pop the exposure just a little bit more. And I'm going to use my brush and bring it down into this area as well. All right, so I think that is going to be much better. Let's go back to, this is before, and this is after we've popped that center. So look at the beautiful glow. So we've done our 2 steps. We worked with our background, we worked with the center of the flower. The third step is all about the light. So you're always wanting to consider where the light source is in your image and how do you want to enhance it. And I love to do this with flower images. So the first thing I think I want to do with this image is go ahead and add a linear gradient. And I want to come over from this corner just over to the edge of my flower. And actually what I want to do here is I want to reduce the highlights, and I'm actually going to darken this corner just a little bit. Tiny, tiny bit. Now I want to add another mask. I'm going to do another linear gradient. I want to come in from this corner almost to the edge of my flower. And I want to use the temperature slider. So I want to come over here, and let me make this smaller for you guys so you can see more of what I'm doing. So I want to come over here and add some warmth. So I'm just giving it that golden glow that was there. And I also want to maybe pop the highlights just a little bit. We could also play with the color. So if I wanted to add a little touch of pink, just to give it a little bit of glow there, I could do that. All right, now I kind of have this blob of green right here that I can use the brush tool. So as you're working, think if there's something that is distracting. And all I'm going to do here is reduce the saturation a little bit, add a little bit more yellow to that area. Just reducing the saturation. Reducing the shadows, brightening it a little bit, and then I'm going to come down and reduce the clarity. That will really help smooth out that area. And then I could also go back and use the remove tool and maybe even change the color just a tiny bit. Continue to brighten it. There we go. So just want to get it a little less distracting. We can also use the heal tool in just a minute. All right, so now I want to come down, and I think I want to do another mask, and this time I'm going to do another linear gradient. I'm going to start it right here, come down, so I'm just enhancing the light, so just continuing to think about modifying the light. I want to add a little bit more of those pink tones and a little bit more warmth, and we can also brighten the highlights. So just thinking about our light source and where it is and how I want to enhance the image with that. All right, I'm going to go back to basic, and I do want to try to address this little spot in the image that I just don't particularly like. So I'm going to use the remove mode, and I just want to try to get this kind of blob of darkness removed. This might be an image that I'd have to take that into Photoshop, but I'm going to try it right here. We're just going to go over it a couple times and see if it becomes a little less distracting. And that is much better. All right, the next step to enhance the light is I want to come down and add a vignette. So a vignette is a great tool where we can add a little darkness on the edges, which really brings in, we could also add some brightness. So it just kind of depends which direction. For this image, I want to add just a little bit of darkness around the edges. So let me show you our before image and now our after with enhancing that light. Now there's a third way that I like to enhance light, and that would be taking the image into Topaz. So Topaz Studio 2, one of my favorite program tools, I have a link to how to purchase it in the description of this email. Now, Topaz does not support this program anymore, so know that it's not getting updates, but it still works great and you can still purchase it. So I'm going to take the image into Topaz for our last step. And in this step, I want to just add some additional light. So when the image opens, I'm going to go to Add Filter, Texture. Under Group, I'm going to select Light Leaks. And now I'm going to scroll down and find one that I think would work. I love this Plum Sherry, and we can reduce the opacity and just see how it's adding some light right here in this corner. Now, there are several other options. We could do this Rainbow Leak and we could flip it. So let's flip it to the other side, and that one's nice as well. Again, you can keep the opacity up, you can bring it down. It's just giving you some extra glow. There are several in here that are really fun to play with. Another one that I like is Light at the End, so you can see how that's adding some glow. And again, we could flip it. There it is at the bottom. I don't want to do that. I want to keep it up at the top. And we can make that, you can see with the opacity all the way up, that's where the light source is. So I think for this image, I would probably use this Plum Sherry. And the great thing about Topaz is we can mask it. So I do not want to impact my flower. So what I'm going to do is invert the mask, grab my brush, make sure I'm all the way on white, and I'll take the brush size up. I'm going to take the softness up, and I can just add that light over in this area. And just give it that little extra kiss of light to bring that in to the image. All right, everybody. So a reminder, those are the 3 steps that I almost always take and consider when editing a flower. Remove any distractions in your background, pop the center with some brightness, and then think about your light source and enhance the light wherever that may fall on your image. So again, this was our before. Of course, I can't now get it to work. Let's go back. And this was our before and our after. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great week.